Hello bookworms! Today I'm going to be doing another wrap-up video. I don't remember what number I'm up to because I'm a little bit behind on posting them and filming them and editing them. I'll figure it out once I post the other ones. I'm actually really excited to do this wrap-up because I loved all of the books that I have to talk about today, so I'm really looking forward to reviewing them for you. So the first book that I have to talk about is Legendary by Stephanie Garber. I've been meaning to read this one for a very long time and I finally got to it and I loved every minute of it. I have to say that I really enjoyed it even more so than I liked Caraval. I thought that the narrator was a lot better than the first narrator. I don't want to give away spoilers, so I'm not going to say exactly who is narrating, but it was really pleasant to be in that character's headspace. I absolutely loved the whole plot going on with the cards. I thought that that was fascinating. It really added like so much to the storyline, and I love the Prince of Hearts amongst lots of other people. I have to say, like, I just thought all of the characters that were added were phenomenal. I really liked the premise of Caraval this year, and I really loved learning some more of the mysteries that were not wrapped up for us in the first book, and I really can't wait until the third one. I really love Stephanie Garber's writing. I think it is absolutely beautiful. I know that it tends to bother some people because she uses a lot of metaphors and similes when she's writing. To me, they sound gorgeous, but I know to other people they're like, what does that mean? But I really like it. I'm honestly just thrilled that there's going to be a third book in this series called Finale, and I can't wait for that to come out. I can't wait to see how this is going to wrap up, and I definitely foresee myself rereading both Caraval and Legendary before that book comes out because the series is just so good. And I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read Only Human by Sylvain Neuvel. This is the third and final book in the Themis Files. Sorry for so many series here. So once again, don't want to spoil anything, but this is one of my favorite sci-fi series. I think that it is so interesting. What happens in the first book is there's a girl named Rose and she's riding her bicycle and she finds what is essentially an enormous robot hand. And then throughout the book, you find out more about where this robot hand could have come from, what it could possibly mean, and there are so many different perspectives and so many different points of view in this book that it's really interesting, and I love that everything takes place on a global scale and not just like contained within the United States. It makes for a really, really interesting story. I thought that the way that it wrapped up was like the only way that it could have been done and for it to be like satisfying. I really enjoyed it. While I definitely missed some of my favorite characters in this final book because sadly they didn't make it until the end, I do think that it was a very good, solid ending, and endings are very hard to do. I actually half listened to this one on audiobook and half read the physical book for it. I really like the audiobooks for these because they're a full cast. It's like as if you're listening to a big production and not just a single narrator telling you a story. Like the people are actually acting everything out, and I feel like that makes the story even more engaging. I did end up reading some of it physically too. I read the first book physically and I enjoyed that just the same, but I am curious to go back and listen to it on audiobook because my favorite characters will be there. I really, really loved this. I thought this was such a great ending and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read what is now one of my all-time favorite books, and that is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. As you can see, I even have 2 copies of it because I loved it that much, but I'm only gonna hold up one because otherwise my arms will hurt. This story was absolutely beautifully written. I was not expecting to love this anywhere near as much as I did. One thing that I will say is that the writing is very dense, so it took me, it's only, how many pages? It's like it's 438 pages, but it took me a really long time to read. But I really enjoyed that. It's very slow burn and there's a lot that goes on in the story, and I really loved the way that magic is explained and the different spells that are used. And I also really enjoyed that Naomi Novik called some of the spells cantrips, which I had never heard that word before I started playing Dungeons and Dragons. So to see like elements of Dungeons and Dragons in this fantasy world, that really, I feel like, endeared it to me even further. Everything about it just like screamed like old magic and like old school fantasy, and it was such a pleasure to read. And again, so beautifully written. Follows a girl who lives in this town, and I believe it's every 10 years, there is a wizard named the dragon, not a dragon, he's a wizard, and he takes one girl from the village into his home and she becomes his apprentice. And he does that, like the town basically sacrifices this girl every 10 years in order to keep their village safe from the forest because there's some bad stuff going on in the woods. It's so good. I really, really liked the main character. I thought that she was really interesting to read from because basically, I mean, it happens right in the beginning. Her best friend was the one that they were expecting to take, and she was basically groomed her entire life to be taken by the dragon, and then doesn't happen, and our main character gets taken. So she has to adjust, and she's like kind of a mess. She's not prim and proper. She doesn't know how to cook. She doesn't know how to do anything that she's really supposed to know how to do in order to be his apprentice. So she has to learn everything from scratch, and she also has to like figure out why she was taken over her friend, and oh my gosh, it's just so amazing. Definitely read this book. If you like fantasy at all, if you like old school fantasy, this is the book for you. It is so good. Like I said, this is definitely a new favorite of mine. It's definitely going to be one of my favorites of the year, and I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars, obviously. Then I'm really excited to talk about this one. I read Thrawn by Timothy Zahn, and Timothy Zahn actually wrote the original Thrawn trilogy. He created the character in what is now considered the legendary canon. I had never read any of that prior to reading this book. I still haven't read it. I want to. I'm really glad that they decided to bring Thrawn back into the current canon. I know that he shows up on Star Wars Rebels, so now I'm really excited to watch that show. But this book was fascinating. It follows Thrawn, who is one of the Chiss. His race is very secretive and very good with like military tactics. So Thrawn basically, he gets captured by the Empire, but he quickly talks his way into getting a meeting with Palpatine, and then he becomes one of the people going through the academy to like join the ranks of the Imperial Army. But he's so smart, he's so intelligent, he is really good at predicting his enemy and just seeing things that other people wouldn't necessarily see. And he keeps his trusty translator, Eli Vento, along with him for his entire career, and it's really, really interesting. I mean, I just love Star Wars so much, so pretty much anything Star Wars I love, but I just thought Thrawn was such a cool character, and the amount of adversity that he goes through because he is this blue-skinned, red-eyed alien, and if you have seen Star Wars, you will notice that pretty much everyone in the Empire is white and, you know, has light skin and light hair and everything because they're very racist. So Thrawn is like one of the only characters that ended up becoming an admiral, which is like one of the highest rankings besides Moff, and he had to go through so much from people who just hated him based on the way that he looked, not even for anything that he did job-wise. But he is so smart, and he really knows when to pretend that he doesn't understand what's going on. He definitely suffers from not understanding social paradigms, but it makes for a really interesting story. And then in addition to that, there was also a character that we met named Arinda Price, and she was really interesting too. She was kind of like a tertiary character, and her story was really interesting as well. I loved this book so much. I can't wait to read Thrawn Alliances, and I know that he teams up with Darth Vader in it, so I'm like super excited for it. But I seriously just love this book. I love Thrawn. He is definitely one of my favorite characters within the Star Wars universe, and I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars yet again. And then lastly, I'm gonna just say 2 books that I'm gonna talk about very quickly, but I reread Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and I reread Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and I think at this point everybody knows what they are about, but my friend Chris and I were buddy reading these because there's a podcast called Binge Mode, and they went back and they reread all of the Harry Potter books. They're still in the middle of doing it. They haven't finished just yet. We think that they're timing it so that they can also read Fantastic Beasts in time for the next film to come out. But they do crazy in-depth podcasts, and each podcast covers about 5 chapters in each book. They'll give you like an assignment, like read these 5 chapters this day, and then the next day they will post the podcast where they wrap up those 5 chapters. And each podcast is about an hour long, so like I said, very in-depth examination. I'm still in the process of listening to the podcast, and I still want to reread the rest of the books and then catch up on those podcasts as well. But I kind of fell behind because I just had a lot of other things to read, quite honestly, and I've read these so many times and I love them, and I will definitely continue my reread, but I just stopped for the moment so that I could get to some other things. So obviously, again, these were both 5 out of 5 star reads for me because I love Harry Potter and it is my favorite. So those are the books that I'm going to be wrapping up in this this wrap up. Let me know if you read any of them. Like I said, I was really excited to do this one because I'm pretty sure I gave almost every single book in here 5 stars because they were all like really good favorite books. I love when I love books and then I'm able to talk about loving them instead of, you know, 3 stars where then you're kind of like, it's hard to rate this because I just kind of felt whatever about it. But these I all really very strongly loved. So I'm glad that I'm able to share that with you. Let me know if you read any of the books that I mentioned or if you plan on reading any of the books that I mentioned. And that's all that I have for this video. So I will see you guys soon in a new one. Bye!